Hey there, it's Laura Dominic. Thanks for joining me on a Plan for Joy podcast. Each week we'll be talking about things that will help you break the cycle of depletion. You know, the one that has you going from doing all the things to feeling overwhelmed, frustrated, resentment, anger, to sucking it up and starting all over again. And instead, learn to break the cycle and contribute from a place of abundance. Are you ready? Good. Let's go. Hello, and welcome to a Plan for Joy podcast. Today I'm going to be talking to you about boundaries, which is something I knew absolutely really nothing about until about 2 years ago. Some caveats before we get started here. I am going to be speaking about my own experiences with boundaries and how I learned them and how vital I have learned that they are. I'm not a therapist. I'm a certified wholeness coach, so there's a difference there. And this is just what I've learned through reading and listening and talking with others and a little bit of therapy that I did myself. There's also so many different ways to talk about boundaries. There's so many nuances. I don't have experience with boundaries in an abusive situation or boundaries in a narcissistic parent situation or anything like that. That's a completely different talk that's outside my wheelhouse. That being said, I'm going to be speaking from my own experience here, just so that hopefully you can learn from what I've been through and see how important boundaries really are to have. Prior to going through my own coaching experience with the Women's School Masterclass, my friend had been talking to me on and off about codependency. And some of the things that she was saying during our conversations was kind of like, had me raising an eyebrow. If I could raise an eyebrow, I would. But, and so it was starting to sound familiar. So one year for my birthday, she sent me a book on codependency. And so I read it and it was very interesting. And there was a lot there I could relate to. But what I wanted to know was, okay, what do I do? What's the solution to this? And then that's when I found the book Boundaries by Doctors Cloud and Townsend. I'll link to it. It's a very famous book on boundaries. It was very eye-opening. And to me, that was the solution to a lot of things that I had been going through for years and years. I read that book. And then I went very shortly thereafter, I went through the Women's School Masterclass and I learned how boundaries are a skill, and I learned how to communicate better, and I learned how to set boundaries and how to hold people accountable. And what I found was even just as important to that was it wasn't just about learning the skill of boundaries. It was about digging into my worth and accepting who I was and that I was worthy. And that was a big part of it. And so sometimes there's a lot more behind why you might not have boundaries or have the ability to hold people accountable. And so, like I said, there are many nuances with boundaries that we could talk about. And I think I might do a future podcast episode about boundaries with young adults, because since my kids have now become young adults, that was a whole nother experience in the world of boundaries. So, but that'll be a talk for another time. And so also I discovered I was having a conversation with a woman friend that I had met via Facebook groups that we've been in. And her parents are not American, they're from Ecuador. And she said what she discovered was that boundaries really are kind of an American thing. So if you're listening to this from outside of the United States, maybe boundaries aren't a big deal where you're from or in your culture. So, which obviously being from the United States, it didn't occur to me. So one thing, and I talk about this in my book, When Good Isn't Good Enough. One thing I was having a really hard time with in regards to boundaries was what I thought a good Christian woman should be. My definition of her, my view of what she should be like based on things that I had read and learned and all that, was that she shouldn't ever say no to anybody. Like if somebody needs her, if somebody wants her to do something, then if she's able to do it, obviously, then she should go ahead and do it. Really kind of whether she wants to or not, because if she doesn't want to, that just means she's being selfish for some reason. Okay, that was my viewpoint. That's what I thought. And so I had a hard time reconciling, not that I really had words for it, but like in my mind, people who now I realize have boundaries or had them and would display them, so to speak. I had a hard time reconciling that. Well, how can you be that good Christian woman and hold a boundary? And so, and then I had read a book about, the wives submitting to their husbands, and I was like, okay, I tend to take things kind of literally, I guess, or maybe too far. I can't think of the word right now. Scrupulosity, that, okay, I can't say no to my husband. I have to be submissive. And so it really caused a conflict in me because I knew that wasn't right, but I didn't know how to counter it. In order to, in order to love others like Christ does, I need to say yes to everything and everything everybody wants from me, right? Unless, of course, it was sinful, then obviously, or I couldn't for some reason do it, then that was obvious. My kids, and this is what I think about, had I learned about this early on, what a difference. Because my kids figured out pretty early on that, I couldn't hold myself to any boundaries. The biggest one being that, when I say no, there's a reason why I'm saying no, and I'm not going to change my mind. Okay, that was never me. And obviously they figured this out pretty quick, and they realized that all they had to do was just keep pestering me enough and I would give in. So, and I'm sure everybody can relate to this, but for me, this was like a constant. And here was the problem with it. So let's just take this very simplistic example. I wanted to eat a chocolate chip cookie, and one of my kids would come in the room and see me eating that chocolate chip cookie and would be begging for a chocolate chip cookie. Now it was close to dinner, let's say, and I knew that it wasn't responsible or good for them because I knew that they wouldn't eat dinner. So I would say, no, you can't have dinner, yada, yada, yada. The child would pout. And again, I would say no. Then the child would continue to beg for that cookie like their life depended on it. Please, please, can I just have a cookie? What, you know how it goes, right? Not that they were throwing a temper tantrum or anything, but they just would push and push. And when they got older, they'd throw in a little bit of reasoning in there, bargaining, reasoning, that kind of thing. And the whole time in my mind, I'd be like breaking it down. If I don't give in to them and give them the cookie, then they'll get mad at me, and then I'll have to deal with that. And it's just, I don't want to deal with that because then I'll feel bad that they got upset or mad at me. And then I'll have to deal with my own feelings as well as dealing with them. So it's easier just to give in after all of this back and forth and give them the cookie. So would I give it to them happily? Of course not. I would say, fine, here, have this cookie. And then I would be mad at them for being so disobedient and pushy and all that kind of stuff. But what I realized was it really them or was it me that caused the problem here? They weren't necessarily misbehaving because that's what I taught them to do. They knew that if they pushed me enough times, I would give in and be mad about it, but I'd give in and let them do whatever it was, obviously within reason, that they were bugging me about. I didn't realize that I could have that boundary, that if I had thought this through, I could say no and stick to it and go on my happy way and not have trained them to be so pushy and then blame them for being naughty. when really it was I'm the one who trained them to be that way. So as I reflected on this, I realized, man, had I known how to do this, had I known how to create and hold and communicate these boundaries, what an incredibly different family dynamic that we would have had. Like, I just can't even think about it. So, because the more I reflected on this over the last year or so, I thought, okay, here's what I would have been like as a mother who had boundaries in this particular instance. Again, I wouldn't have to go hide in my closet anymore to eat chocolate chip cookies. I would have been able to stand there right in the wide open kitchen, eating my chocolate chip cookie. And if the child came in and asked for a cookie, I would, okay, let's take a second, blah, blah, blah. Let's go back and forth in my mind about whether it's reasonable or not. And then if I still really believe that they shouldn't have this cookie, I would just say no and mean it. And they would know I meant it, because then that's what they would have been trained. Oh, when mom says no, she's not going to change her mind. And then we could have both been happy. I mean, they might have been like, yeah, fine. Okay. Bummer. I don't get a cookie now. But if I had decided at that point, well, it's a reasonable request, I'll give them a cookie, that's fine, I would have been saying yes because I wanted to say yes. And that is the key to having boundaries. Is it's not that you're supposed to be selfish. It's that I could say yes and be happy about it. And I wouldn't have to be like throwing it at, across the kitchen saying, fine, here, have this cookie, stop bugging me. No, there wouldn't be any of that. And when I saw so many years later that this was how it was supposed to work, that part about saying yes because I want to say yes and not because I felt pressured into saying yes, like I was in tears, because I was mourning all of the times I had felt pressured into saying yes, even though I knew I didn't want to say yes. I was crying because I didn't think I was worthy of telling people no and risking that they were going to get mad at me. Because remember a couple episodes ago, I talked about that, how I was such a people pleaser because I needed people to like me. So, getting people upset with me by telling them no was very difficult. And so I would never hold those boundaries. And then I'd get mad at the person instead of myself. But then I learned, because I used to think, you're being rude or selfish if you say no to somebody without, giving them this long-winded explanation as to why you're saying no to them. Not necessary, by the way. But when I read that book, I was like, oh my gosh, God wants us to have boundaries. Boundaries are good. Boundaries are biblical. It's perfectly fine to have a boundary. I can say no if I have a valid reason to say no. And again, there are a lot of nuances to that, but that decision is between me and God. Okay, maybe I should have said yes, and it was selfish of me to say no. And okay, that's on me. Got that, right? My husband, really good at holding boundaries. And for many, many, many years, I was just like, I would be so put off that he would say no and not give me some explanation as to, why he was saying no. Because in my mind, the good Christian person just didn't do that. And so it was a lot to work through. And what I discovered through going through the master class and working on all the steps in my Plan for Joy format is that really the goal is to give and contribute to other people, right? But we're supposed to be able to do that from a place of abundance and not from a feeling of resentment or coercion, or feeling like if I don't do this, I'm going to be in big trouble. And then you feel mad about the fact that you have to do something you didn't want to do. By working on my worth and my self-image, and then learning the skill of boundaries and learning how to communicate better and learning how to hold people accountable, and that I'm not responsible for how other people feel. Like, I can't change their reaction to what I say. Huge, huge game changers. All of these things that I learned allowed me really freedom. It was like the feeling of being free after all these years to say yes to people because I really wanted to say yes, and to say no if for some reason I needed to say no. Do I still get it wrong? Of course, I'm a work in progress. It's a lot of years of unlearning that needs to be done. But like, I can't even describe how beautiful it is to know that I have a choice, right? And so, again, like I said before, you have to be careful. Obviously, boundaries can be used in a very selfish way, and that's between you and God and in your examination of your own conscience, right? It's not up to other people to tell you that your boundaries are wrong. And then even too, I think because now that I'm more aware, again, remember, awareness is the key that unlocks the prison that we're in. And so now that I'm aware of what it looks like to have a boundary, I'm amazed at how many people really don't have them. Because you'll come across someone who is just like really good with their boundaries, and it still kind of like shocks me. And I have to say, no, that person's not being rude and uncaring. They probably have a very good reason for why they said what they said, and they're confident in their own reasons. And that's up to them. It has nothing to do with me. So they know that saying no to someone or something is the right thing for them to do at that moment. And then when they are saying yes, they're saying it because they really want to, not because they feel they have to. And a person with boundaries is contributing to others, and they can do it really with peace and joy because they've made a decision that's good for them and for those who have asked them. Boundaries are really so freeing and joy-filled. If you have a problem with boundaries like I did, then you really need to learn about them and learn how to use them properly. More than likely, though, in addition to boundaries, like I said, there's more that you need to learn, that there's something deeper than that going on. Probably something with your self-worth and your self-image. Maybe, again, if it's something more serious, if it's a more serious situation, then maybe it's therapy worthy. In addition to coaching, it's nice because the two work really well together. So I'm going to put that out there, that the coaching experience that I had with the masterclass was so life-changing, especially in this area, that I'm going to encourage you that if you could relate to anything of what I was saying about letting people push you around and feeling bad and then blaming them because you felt bad, I'm going to encourage you to read my book if you haven't done that. And that'll be a good introduction to what this is all about. And then let's talk. We can have a free strategy phone call and figure out what is the best course of action for you to take to learn these skills that you need to learn. Because it can literally change your life. And not only will it change your life, but then it'll have that ripple impact. It'll change the whole dynamic of your family in a positive way. And you'll be able to teach your kids how to have boundaries. Something my kids are having to learn on their own. Some of them are naturally, they must have inherited it from my husband. But the other ones have had to learn, like I have, that this is a necessary skill. And so let's take this take this by the reins and design the life that you want to live through prayer and discernment, and then working on the things that need to be worked on and building your own plan for joy. Really, that's what you need to do, because that will allow you to just be so much more free and full of joy. So like I said, there's so many things I could have talked about boundaries. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say. Do you have a problem with this? Have you had situations come up? Is there anything else you would love to hear me talk about regarding boundaries? Like I said, I'd like to talk about boundaries in young adult children and at another time. But please, give me feedback. Let me know what you think. And then subscribe to my podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, or watch on YouTube, either way. And then leave a review, please. That would be wonderful, because reviews really help podcasters. And then I will see you next week. God bless.